Good morning. Watch out. Can I have your attention, please? Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome. Welcome to the Capacity Building Conference. You have no rights. No Aboriginal rights. No treaty rights. And any rights you think you may have can be stripped away in an instant. These words were spoken to our people, our leaders, 40 years ago. It's been said by the lawyer of the James Bay Agreement, James O'Reilly, who our late Grand Chief Billy Diamond took on and made famous. Never before has a nation become so strong when they came together. Our nation has risen to the occasion time and time again. Our nation will continue to rise to the occasions in the days ahead. Today, now, and into the future, it is my time, it is your time, it is our time. Miigwech, thank you.
Dr. Philip Awashish.
More in our area, the English and the French peoples arrived. We started with the French, or the English, when Jean Cabot arrived. Actually, Cabot was the Italian. The English hired him to come over. And he claimed the land for England, and then the French arrived to discover, although we were there. Now that's how we end up with Canada, basically as an English country. Because the British Parliament enacted the BNA Act, the British North American Act, to establish Canada. Under the BNA Act, of course, Indians became a matter of federal jurisdiction. The Indian Act was enacted by the Parliament of Canada in 1876, and there have been various amendments to that act over the years, over 20 amendments, the latest one in 1985. But the Cree are not subject to the Indian Act anymore, thanks to the James Bay Agreement and the subsequent negotiations that led to the enactment of the Queen-Quebec Act. So we are free from the chains of the Indian Act. The Indian Act meant having to register peoples. In the 20s and 40s, 1920s and 40s, people were being registered as Indians under the Indian Act at the time. Federal government started educating people or having kids attend school through day schools, village schools, and Indian residential schools. These Indian residential schools had an impact on the serious damaging impacts, that is, on culture, Ewe culture, language, and heritage. And many Ewe became victims of abuse in these schools. These are the two kids praying. Moose Factory is Indian Residential School, Moose Factory, that's where I attended. And also the Chinook Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie. 30s and on to the 60s, natural resources such as minerals were discovered at the USG that began the opening of the USG territory. Chibougamau was started in the early 50s, and commercial reforestry activities started. In 63, Hydro-Quebec was established by Quebec. The Indians of Quebec Association started in the late 60s. That was the first organization in which the Crees participated. You can see some Cree in the Indians of Quebec Association, the executive days. Chief Joseph Sam Atkinson, Fort George, and Smalley Bilhawno, Chief of Ristisni. These were the Montagnier, Inu. And you probably recognize Sean Chrétien there. He was the Minister of Indian Affairs. In those days, and Max Grolowee, Huron, and Andrew DeLille was the President of the the Mohawk. From those days it was called Cognawaga, now it's Kanawaki, Indian rights. Then Barossa announced the James Bay hydroelectric project. We know that would flood hunting territories of the EU. The youth at the time were able to read the newspapers, so that's how we learned about the James Bay hydroelectric project. The Cree people were never consulted, so there was no consent on that project at the time. Because as Rodney explained earlier, the government of the day simply took the position we had no rights. So the meeting was held.
About Swartnam. About Stephen Gatter after mass. The Jesus in one day the match, then the Jason almost to this year. When the guys should straight the match, you ate the guys have stairs. Yeah, so I wasn't even out to get shaved and I got shares. You got the match stairs who lost with them channels. To start off with what the version of Creed, when they posted the project, the James Bay project. I was the oldest of the group. You know, they were all youth. They were in their 20s. And I suppose I was the worst of the lot, even. Being bagged in many ways. But anyhow, we didn't have nothing to go by, to guide ourselves with, except the knowledge that we had from elders and our own forefathers and our ancestors and whatnot. What we had is the fact that they always used to say yes to the white people whenever they come to do something for our villages and so on. They used to say yes all the time. And when I was in my younger age, in my teenage, I used to feel that this is the way the life of the EU, to say yes, the white man knows it all. And then I finally realized that this is not so. We're equal. You know, we have our own destinies, we have our own culture and so on and so forth. We had to fight for our rights, what we believed in.
Billy Diamond was elected the spokesperson in 71 and the first Grand Chief when we started the Grand Council. Quebec said we had no rights and they didn't want to discuss the project and negotiate whatsoever. We went to court in April of 71, 72.
Robert calls me up, he says, Ted, I would like you, he gets right to the point. I would like you to come down to Montreal and because we would like you to serve as the translator for the James Bay court case.
The end of June and early July 1971, the Cree decided to oppose the James Bay hydroelectric project and protect their rights. And the chiefs at the time designated Billy Diamond as the spokesperson. That began the process of deciding to act as one people, one nation, and one voice. This is how we empowered ourselves. We can't expect the government to empower you. You have to empower yourself and just do it. This is the meeting of the Cree chiefs in Mr. at the time. It was hosted by the Cree Nation of Mr. Snee. You can see Billy Diamond there. Right over here. A lot of chiefs of the Cree communities were present. It was a rare occasion at the time when youth and elders and those in between joined together because we shared a common vision and therefore had a common journey. Maloof rendered his judgment in November, stopped the hydro project on the basis of EU and Inuit rights. It's a major court decision for the recognition of Indian rights at the time. The U-hunters and the Houtimauts were instrumental and essential in the court proceedings. They were the ones who explained the U way of life, use and occupation of UST. They were very important. Without them, we wouldn't have won a court case, and without having won in a court case, there would be no James Bay Agreement. And then the court was appealed, and then the negotiations started with John Chiacha as negotiator, and we talked about our rights, and we decided to pursue recognition and protection of our rights through a treaty process. And the Grand Council was established, and the negotiations for a modern-day treaty continued. What was our vision at the time as treaty makers and leaders?
We molded and shaped the James Bay Northern Agreement under the guidance of our elders and trappers and people in the Cree community.
It was largely aimed to change and improve the social political situation of the EU, and that's just the way it was in those days. Mozambians were scattered. They didn't have it because their old post had closed. And the same with Nemska. They were dispersed to Ruber's house, Waskagness in those days. And the Ojibwe people were scattered as well and lived in very small encampments, no access roads. And we communicated by radio. We functioned separately. The Grand Council was not established until '74. Hunting, fishing was the main way of life, traditional way of life. This right was not recognized by Canada and Quebec. And we were charged for alleged illegal hunting. Spring hunting of geese, as an example, was not permitted by federal law. Game wardens raided the EU hunting camps. They used to take away rifles, hunting rifles, fishing, kill nets, any fish or meat that we had in the camps. And some people were actually taken to court. So they, Quebec, Canada did not recognize the human right of self-government. They controlled everything in the Cree communities: education, health, community development, and local government was supervised and controlled by federal legislation and Indian affairs. And, Quebec was promoting natural resource development, and that without consulting the EU. In '71, they commenced construction of the hydroelectric project in James Bay. And so the vision was based on a strong desire and will to change and improve the social, political, and economic status and situation of the EU. And we embarked on a journey for social justice. This journey is also about empowerment of EU and nation building, with a particular mission to seek recognition and protection of EU rights. And Canada was there. They had to settle the EU land claims and protect the interests, because they were part of a lawsuit too. We had to sue them as well. And Quebec wanted to maintain and protect its territorial integrity, jurisdiction, and interest, and Hydro-Quebec, of course, wanted to build the hydro project. The agreement in principle was signed '74. Gave us a year to negotiate. It's Billy Nyman, Robert Kanawat, Ted Moe this year. There's truly. That's the Cree Mafia in those days. On November 15th, the James Bay North Quebec was signed. You see Billy there and the government officials. Rasa sitting over there. And that's what the Cree government, what the JBNQA stood for, the Cree, the Charter of Rights, really. It's a modern-day treaty that recognizes and protects EU rights. It's also now a court settlement, because we had sued Hydro-Quebec, Government Quebec and Government Canada over their intrusion into our territories and their non-recognition of our rights. For the government, it meant full governance and development of natural resources. The JBNQA permits a form of hydroelectric development in accordance with the agreement. So our rights currently are protected, recognized by treaty, which is the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, and by law, because there is enabling legislation to put the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement into force. And in 1982, the Constitution was amended to recognize Aboriginal treaty rights. The JBNQA is treaty under Canada's supreme law. We continue to assert our inherent right through traditional governance of use. In Dohosti, we still have our tallyman in Dohojamount governing their hunting territories. We have our local governments, chiefs and councils, that is.
The 1980s was a time when there were true intentions of the government that became known. Askuman jidagon geo jamasjane, geo masjesho, geo askunjane, geo pagawing, geo jebabam the danger the baswing dan hagado dawik, gage shinisho dadu on Quebec says ma, a gamagnetic daniel, a gide dutkia, Gibaji jebabam the danger babambing jidagonia. But my presentation deals with dealing with a lack of implementation of the obligations of the federal and provincial governments. I'll talk to you about some of the tense and oppositions that we encountered. And of course, we're just a little bit more sophisticated. We had a legal strategy, we had a communication strategy. In our communication strategies, we talked about conducting polls in the media, writing op-eds, telling our story. No, we took a political strategy. We also took an international strategy. These are some of the things that one has to do if you want to protect and advance Cree rights. So this is my purpose here, I guess, to share with you, what the leaders have fought for. What our leaders have fought for, we saw in my time. I was only 31 years old when I was the Grand Chief. And certainly I saw the efforts of the late Grand Chief Billy Diamond, and of course Grand Chief Ted Moses, who had kept the fight for the advancement and protection of our rights. Yes, we saw a little progress, was made only as a result of the the epidemic of gastroenteritis that claimed 7 lives in 1972. There was a sewer and water systems that were promised in 1975 that finally began to be built in the communities. And of course, after 9 years of negotiations in 1978, the Cree School Board was at least provided with the funding regime needed to start the implementation section 16 of the agreement. So as you can imagine, when Premier Bourassa was elected in 1985, it was already clear that he would seek to build a second and a third phase of the James Bay Hydroelectric Project. Then, of course, he announced the Great Well River Project and the Nottoway Broadback River Project. And Quebec made its decision to proceed with those projects in 1989. When we heard about this decision, we decided at a General Assembly in Montreal to take a stand against the Great Well River Project and what we called NBR projects. We are the generation that saw the impacts of that first project, and consequently our people are still attempting to adapt to those major changes of being dispossessed of your lands and being pushed and to live into your communities. So it required a lot of adaptation. Certainly, announcement of a Great Well or the NBR was not in our interest, and certainly we were opposed to it. But this was not an easy decision to make, as these two projects were already described as a possible future projects in the James Bay Treaty. But as Grand Chief at that time, I had seen the problems in the implementation of the James Bay Treaty. I've also seen the completion of the LeGrand Complex and the efforts of Crees to accommodate changes to that project to allow its completion. Some of that accommodation is a result of the Fort George Relocation Agreement. It was signed in 1978. The SACME Agreement, signed in 1979, and the LeGrand Phase 2 Agreement of 1986 were all evidence of keeping our word. When we assembled in Montreal, we were well aware of the extent of the broken promises in 1989. We saw that Hydro-Quebec had completed its projects. We saw that our project of building our communities and of providing our people with jobs and opportunities was not happening. We had given to Hydro-Quebec what it needed to complete its projects, but we faced refusal from Quebec and Canada concerning the implementation and fulfillment of their legal obligations under James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. The policing in the community was needed, underfunded thousands housing facilities, there were few recreation facilities. There were no roads. People were suffering from the impacts of having three communities, attended residential schools, yet the forestry, the biggest source of work for the rest of the territory. There were few people needed employment, working on their land. The statistics show the large mills had not out of the hundreds working for Hydro-Quebec. Trees were not even working in mining, as they had hired Pimsca mine before the James Bay Treaty was in place. Well, we had a General Assembly to discuss the strategy to fulfill our mandate of doing all things necessary to stop the Great Whale River project. Of course, we needed money. We actually had to ask the Board of Compensation to use the heritage funds in order to provide some of the unfulfilled legal obligations of the federal and provincial government. We also had to ask the Board of Compensation to use some of the heritage funds to fight and to be able to protect for further erosion and flooding of our lands. The Quebec Agreement had been broken, and that the hydroelectric dams could therefore not be built. One of our biggest challenges was to educate the people in the South about our territory, about our way of life, and our way of life on the land. We need to build alliances with our First Nations. We need to build alliances with environmental groups. We need to talk about human rights and the treatment of our people and the displacement and dispossession of our people. We need to develop arguments for alternative needs to energy as opposed to just building mega dams and just flooding lands. And we have to argue that any proposed dams would be subject to some rigorous environmental impact assessments. It was our treaty right, and we need to ensure that that section was implemented.
That's pretty long, good. What does this mean? New relationship begs the question, what was wrong with the old one? Something really had to be wrong if my wife or one of my children came up to me and said, "Hey Dad, we need to talk about a new relationship." I would be really, really worried. If you are assuming that the old relationship between the Cree and Quebec was bad, you would be wrong. It was worse than bad. Keep in mind, before 2001, we followed the government around the world to denounce their plans of separatism and natural resource development, which excluded us from any benefits. You heard our Grand Chief speak on that this morning. We sued every one of their companies. We even sued companies they didn't own, but that they had helped because we said it allowed the companies to move forward while ignoring our rights. Time and again, the Cree Nation, despite the pressure and forces from the outside, has stood united. We did it in the early 1970s, and I recognized that we needed to do it again in the late 1990s. The Crees of Quebec, the Crees of the USC, the fact that we identify ourselves as such is our strength. And because despite everything, we acted like a nation. It was only natural for the government of Quebec to treat us and formally recognize us as a nation and as a government. It is important that we never forget how important this is. At our first meeting with the government of Quebec, our leaders were told, as you heard this morning, they had no rights, that we were squatters, and that the Premier had more pressing matters. I asked Romeo Saginash, who was our liaison in Quebec, to organize a meeting with me with the new Prime Minister. I told him I'm not in a rush. I don't want to be among the first 10. I'll wait a couple of months. The end of June came about, and we met. The question a few questions, 3 questions that, that stand out at the meeting. He said, Chief, I understand that you're having great progress with Hydro-Quebec and that you are discussing future hydroelectric development. And I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, you have been misinformed and you have been misled. There is no table of negotiations, there will be no table of negotiations until Hydro-Quebec has fulfilled their obligations under the 1975 James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, and until the government of Quebec has also fulfilled their obligations, because you have reneged on them. Well, he didn't ask me a question. He said, well, as you know, Grand Chief, we take pride, we are the first government here in Canada to recognize the Aboriginal groups of Quebec as nations. I said, well, I commend the government of Quebec for doing that. I was in those constitutional discussions and negotiations when that came about to be, and it is important that we be recognized as nations. However, the resolution of the National Assembly is sitting somewhere in the archives of the National Assembly, and it is not having the effect that it is supposed to have effect. It does not give hope to our young people. It does not create jobs. It does not improve the socio-economic conditions in our communities. We cannot develop our communities as we had contemplated in 1975. Well then, Grand Chief, tell me, who are you first? Are you first a Canadian? Or are you first a Quebecois? Well, he was asking me that question. All kinds of stuff went in my head, Ooh, this is a curveball. It's going to be the end of my relationship with him. And, I'll never be able to do what I had envisaged to do. So, with all my exposure to, the international arena, international law, my advocacy, it clicked. I said, I am not first a Canadian, nor am I first a Quebecois. I am EU, or Inu, which means I am part of the peoples. And peoples in international law have a right of self-determination, period. So hating Hydro, a mining company, or anyone else who would touch my trap line is easy. Trying to make things work, compromise without letting go of what you have won, is hard. When the fight is over, the government of Quebec offered to sit down and treat us as a nation and to give us the resources to fulfill their treaty obligations so that we could build our communities in a manner that meets our needs and priorities. They also offered to be more inclusive with us if we promised to be open to hydroelectric development, mining, and forestry, subject to respecting our treaty instead of systematically opposing development. The cost, we had to agree to participate in the submission of the Rupert River partial diversion to the environmental and social impact assessment process under our treaty. This was a difficult choice. It was not easy. Like I said, fighting is easy. Deciding to try and make things work with whom has been your enemy is hard. I'm proud that we made this choice in the most important way as a nation. A unanimous decision with the Cree leadership if we were to move forward. We had to remain united when it came time to sign the final agreement. I found the strength of Cree unity even more impressive. The majority of all the community members voted in favor of the agreement, except for the community members of Tessessaby. Yet, still, the chief of Tessessaby voted in favor of the agreement for the sake of Cree unity.
Due to time, I'm going to ask the students to ask a question for all the for the panel here. มื่อตัวหนูในเวทมาตัวจอชอลุน
I weet wel, wil aan schrijven. Beli, jana beli, timen ja. Hoe zie je dat een keer? Hoe je hebt nog niet zo dat iets. Ik, Romeo, aan schrijven uit dat iets niet doet. En de toe in toe, hoe speelt je? Ja, wat dan? Wat dat zie, ja, wat zie. Dingen, gewend weet je zo dat. Aan schrijven.
Eshkwek chemut Joshua aynı gece itibaren hadan bir de biliyor. Semanage biliyor. Tangayte taksuya. Nuji su te taksu yemen. Gen de tek çoya nuja nuchok ti vachta. Nuju sponta çoya bokta. Ye pega ni biliga mojga te tek çoya. Snega ji teme şey ji teme yok. Mozga čtejte, kaž kot je tega, je David si nekaj, je skot mađe nekaj. Vi ništo ti ni več kot vi sko vorga, kad što vi tajme. Evi ga djajmo tehniva, jo, vi je skot ni skot masodga. Je džindem god da, jo, u tavi keha, jo, če joga, če ni gač kake. Je dživi betanot ne, je skulot ne bač, kad juet ne, de maglo je David si nekaj. Cái đó nhiều ai cái mà nhiều ai chịu cái chịu chụp đều này school thì chính đây mà chỉ là street này thì sai là street này sai là nhiều lần chỉ có tôi là để nhiều street cái cái mà cái cái chỉ biết có cái na beli nam oi boni cái school ấy biết sốc cái mà sốc cái behit nana to thì behit đó thì bây giờ biết text cái mà sốc Chen hebben het zoiets met schemegen, tweede met mensen schemegen. Kooit wie snappen en nega snappen, wie het gaat school, wie school gaat weer. En gaat dus dat ook niet, dat je net maar gaat. Dat ook niet op nega dat je te betalen gaat, als je gaat. En dat ook niet, en dan is dat ook niet. Kooit je boemen zeggen naar het zingen. Kooit je ten nega stijgen, school. Kijk je die stijgen, stijgen en ik zingen. Dat is wat maar doen. 이거 좀 이렇게 손어. 이제 나가 시다이 이 모노 비도고. 얘 이외 있던게. 이거 비티 좀 집에 돼. 좀 손어. 내가 마시고 비다 그러니까. 이제 재미가 그 맞아야 나지 지다 그래. 네?
Migas Joshua que chegou. Estamos a gente não só nós temos sugestão some Diego te bieg singas Secretariat Creation Youth Council Paulian mas que smuk nem de não te snatch the wemigis that ni me tem maga some Diego haben de gut mi gosh não nisto you know I'm pleasantly surprised to see so many youth and young people here and students. Because I recall when Paul and I chaired the first meeting of the Cree Nation Youth Council in Wemigi. There was about 40 of us at that time. And when we decided to embark on the organization and the implementation of the Cree Nation Youth Council. So it's been a long time. And I was telling Tina last night as I drove in, I was contemplating the names on this panel, and I suddenly realized that if you combine the experience of the 5 of us here, there's about 200 years of experience sitting right here. I say that because I'm happy to see that you've seized the opportunity to come and listen to your leaders, first of all, but second of all, I need to remind you that all of these leaders that you see on this panel, that you saw on previous panels, and that you'll see in the other panels following us, are there for you. And be humble in approaching them, because they have a lot of stories to tell and a lot of things to teach you. In essence, what Matthew was saying basically is is this. This is a panel on defending and protecting Cree rights. And essentially what Matthew was saying is know them. Know your rights. Whether it's rights under your human rights, your Aboriginal rights, your treaty rights, your rights under the Constitution of Canada, your rights under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Your former leaders treaded a lot of miles to arrive at where we are today. Your former leaders laid that very solid foundation that we have today as a nation, as a people. And it's up to you now to take us forward, because these rights will continue to evolve. I remember in the early 60s and 70s, not too many lawyers in the courts talked about the concept of Aboriginal rights. In the early 1980s, and Ted can attest to this, in the early 1980s, not too many people on the international stage talked about Indigenous people's rights in international law. Today, the right of self-determination of the 370 Indigenous people are recognized under international law because of the work that the Grand Council has done, because of the work that Ted Moses has done for our people. So we have to continue building on that, because that is the task ahead. These rights will continue to evolve. You will have to continue defending them.
How have the elders shaped your identity as a person? Introduction.
Okay, nyang jauh deh biasa, makanan dia orang bicara. Kita panas channel je, kita mungkin ada kan, because instruiat, kita mungkin ada kan, because macam di ni mana. Dia orang sekerja instruinan, mau yaska, dia orang bicara. 4 times a year I had get on General Assemblies. Maga we the march di no tani. Tani speak kak we the mukana channel musbet we sangan channel de we the gas. Jadi it not magiat ka magacha. And stick kak mas tukunya ga. Et stay magnet get channel de ni gas. Et we work. Kaka daga betul dia yang state action di mana dia jadi which he got even had chain one minus which gets go hard chain none had Jackie call I got you don't get yeah David D. Bush die Boer we don't get it and she had a good look dan is het stemmaatje daarna gehaald. Weet je, JT betaald is. Ja, het was stil dan is. Weet je, ze daar stuur daar juist. Ook al elders councils te doen. De was een beetje. We al gaan een beetje zo zijn. Is nou niet. Als je meer aan nu te wel ook. Nieuws, hoe lekker is die een beetje daar. Bieden dat. Die dan natuurlijk. Maar ga je. We are modern beetje gewoon naar binnen. We start one. Als we weer nooit stak hoe bedoel je? Dus dat moet je hem en dat het is. Ik ga het niet zeggen, excuse Tegen excuse jij die chill en dat het is wel niet goed steeds. Moet je hem als je gaat beschrijven, zeker niet. Goed stiga. Ik ga het hem had. Ik ga het ook af te beetje kijken. Het is gewoon ja. Ja, wij als kunstje, wat zijn binnen die iets te betalen kijken die. Dus ja, wij als kunstje dan ja. En dat wel niet goed. Ik knas ga weten hier. James Riley hier. I like this court case. Lord versus the Queen. Hey, you snug, kijk, die obacht nagas ne ja beklaska już go. Jak dzisiaj myśl do ja bega hem skutsma beg should you im hadga to gonna a consultation processes. Isto mag mo to gonna agna ha 가진 가부치가 이 말로다 제 직접 함자요 무슨 외노자요 메스나요 뭐가 위 하도니까 감타 되지 이거다 가우치 되지가 되지야 제지야 we ask 제가 이거다 가우치 되지야 예몬이 테크스 그 스튜디오 제지야 아무리 가래네 페이드 브랩 es kunt sinja just niet zo sterk sinja het niet begot kai spijka dat peerberg je gaat mijn just ud nenya het niet je dit gas muga den gaat je bent staan je ud nam kunnen die opportunities je zo bij kan ja begot je steken muga Wees niet het was, maar een stapstia, absurdunia. Moshas, we yes, we know. Always have to prepare ourselves for new developments within those agreements. So some of these agreements are just building blocks. So the future can be yours also. You can also build on these agreements.
I encourage you, even if you feel that you are in the background of what's happening, that's the best way to learn and work your way up. So I look forward to more women taking on the leadership. I look at Kathleen and Darlene and Violet, and I think of the men who were sitting here before. Of course, Edna was part of this. But I think of that, and often I hear people referring to the men who were then leaders. I mean, they're still leaders today. As being referred to as the sons of the Cree hunters. What should we be called as women? Daughters of beaver skinners, maybe? I'd be proud to be called that. Margopskun Jesuit pluckers? We can carry lots of names. So when you think about control and responsibility, all you people that are here, the students, our future, towards building a strong Cree nation and to be masters of our homeland, don't forget who you are, where you came from, and be proud of who you are. That's my message. In our vision, some of the points that are in our vision for Cree Board of Health, we talk about capacity building, which is the ability to resolve our own problems. The other thing that it talks about is control and empowerment, which is to take our leadership in what we do. And then the other point, which is part of what we're doing today, talks about responsibility and accountability. And within the Cree Board of Health, we have many jobs for you. We have over 1,150 full-time employees within the organization. What we need are doctors, dentists, pharmacists. I would like to see someday to see, Pachano pharmacist, a pharmacy, or even a Moses pharmacy, Petawabano. Maybe a Moses Petawabano. So we have lots of work for you. We have to fill in all those professional positions that we need in order to be responsible and accountable to our people in the delivery of quality services. So nurses today, we need 150 nurses as I speak of today.
And half of our Cree Nation government as well. So this ongoing journey and shift to a more meaningful self-government is a fundamental aspect of nation building that you, USG, have reclaimed governance as an average of treaty, right, and activity. And there you have today's USG with the 10 communities, and it consists of over 300 hunting territories in the USG. It's probably our most valuable possession as a USG, because it forms the foundation of our heritage, our governance, our culture, our way of life, our identity as a people, as a nation. Okay, thank you. Let's go. No, sir.
Most of you have encountered challenges, and many of you have devised some ways to overcome those challenges. And you know there are plenty, it is simply a life's reality. When I first left Tesabe in 2001 to get to where I am now in education, it was my second attempt at post-secondary education. In my first attempt, I was straight out of secondary school. I was 17 and only lasted a year, not because of poor grades, but because of the extreme culture shock that I experienced. Living in a city, living in a place where the culture is totally different, it really made me physically ill. I was lost and I couldn't cope, so I went back to Tesabe. But by the time I decided to go back to school, it was 5 years later, and I was ready and eager to make a full and positive experience out of my educational journey. I was driven, so much so that up until my recent graduation date back in November, I had been in school for 9 years. And I did so all the while raising a small family, or starting my family in the process, and raising 2 small kids and 2 older with neat suits that I took in as my own. So, look at the bedroom, shish. And you continue to survive for a purpose. We will do what Stanchkushim Noj have always done, but in an age where we affront a very different kind of challenge. We as students, graduates, and community members have a great opportunity this weekend to get to know a bit more of our own history, to find out in what direction we want to move as individuals in our nation, and to determine how proactive we are going to be in the shaping and maintaining of our nation and who we are as Anishiyuj.
Merci beaucoup. Bon après-midi. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to join with you today in this extraordinary conference that is all about building the future, all about strengthening the young people in this room and reminding you that you are not leaders of tomorrow, you are leaders of today. So I salute you, all of you, I'm glad for the chiefs and respected elders who are joining with us today, but this is really about all of you. And it's a privilege and an honor for me to join with you today. As Mimi so kindly pointed out, I've been traveling across the country over the past months. Every different corner of this country, engaging with, listening to, talking with people about the kind of future we want to build. And the focus I've had is really getting them to reconnect with politics in a positive way, in a way that is hopeful, as active citizens, ready to demand more of their governments, of their communities, and mostly of themselves. And one of the great things about this past few months is while I've been sharing that message and trying to help out the Liberal Party that way, there's been this extraordinary movement of Idle No More at the same time, which has been all about young natives particularly, but people reaching out and drawing in and becoming active, and people finding their voice and working to channel a tremendous amount of energy and hope and idealism into positive outcomes. And one of the things as I talk about the need to awaken and recommit people to governance, to contributing to our communities, I get to turn to an example. Because it's not simply enough to talk about the need for change and action. You have to show that it can be achieved, that there are successful examples to inspire us and to suggest solutions that can be adapted to other situations. And that's why I was so proud to have been invited to come here to talk about the success of the Cree Nation in forging a new path forward. Over the past 40 years, the Cree Nation of Iuwitchi has accomplished a tremendous amount for such a young nation. You've engaged in your own process of decolonialization, and in your own way, according to your own agenda. You have done this in spite of criticisms, in spite of accusations, and in spite of very difficult struggles with both federal and provincial governments. Your leaders have remained true to a set of principles, and they have remained true to a grand and noble vision. Under your inspired and visionary leaders, from Billy Diamond to Ted Moses to Matthew Lukash, and of course, the Grand Chief Matthew Kumham, your nation has achieved what Aboriginal peoples across the country are now once again bringing to our attention. You have put into place many of the key recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and you have implemented many of the important sections of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Over the last few months, we have witnessed young Aboriginal people from all parts of the country. We have witnessed courageous chiefs such as Teresa Spence, and we have witnessed the elected Aboriginal leadership once again bringing to the attention of Canadians the completely unacceptable and intolerable living conditions which still exist in far too many of the First Nations communities across the country. There have been calls for a number of fundamental changes which are required to finally begin to redress this sad situation for our country.
And it's so dynamic because we as a generation, we bring back reviving our custom ways. I'm an example because my late father is Albert. He's in the spirit world, but you also see his influence on me. You also notice his teachings, and you have that memory. And you're able to bring that up to honor that too, not just with him, but with the grandparents, with the uncles, the aunts, anybody who's influenced you to inspire you to stand strong and use your voice. And again, our leadership.
Another important conclusion, which something you mentioned earlier, Tina, is that Cree rights can never be taken for granted. The past 40 years has shown us that it's only because we have been vigilant in ensuring respect of our treaty rights and other Aboriginal rights that we have been able to progress from one agreement to the next. We've learned also even the Pedibrab, which was a great achievement for the Cree, made possible a real partnership between the Cree and Quebec in economic development, needed careful attention on our part. Because very shortly after it was signed, Quebec passed Bill 40, which tried to exclude the Cree from the governance of the territory. This damage is only now being undone under the recent agreement on the governance agreement. It has been a constant struggle to ensure the JBNTO Treaty, the Pedibrab, and other agreements are respected, and it will continue to be a struggle in the future. Well, Tina and I have been talking about this conference, and we were really excited about it and so forth, and we said, if only, we could do this and really get the message out, and if our young generation would understand and take on the next challenge, wouldn't it be wonderful? I said, maybe 50 years from now, the Cree Nation would look like this. Thank you very much.
Very much. Just to zoom in a little bit, we have, I just wanted to mention that in the beautiful communities that we have up there, we have ports, as you'll see, and Air Quebec flying international, and some beautiful old age homes as well. So that you, us, can take over. What Jack said.